the big B-29s, which I suppose is the leader of the flight which was to put on a demonstration of air power here over the bay this morning. The weather is miserable for a demonstration of air power. The ground freezing is not more than about 1,500 feet. But everything is going according to plan. On the ground has finished time. Lieutenant General Adonis from Wainwright and General Superficial has saluted him, and General MacArthur is back to the microphone.
The representatives of the United States of America will now sign. The Republic of China will now sign.
A very youngish-looking general, General Hu Yang Chang, representing the Chinese Republic, steps up to the table and says,
That's the end of the audio.
Yeah. So that's actually a radio announcer. That was an actual clip of the signing of the surrender document, and then they actually announced the plane coming over, the B-29s coming over. And you can hear the B-29s in the background.
Right, sure.
That's the first time we ever heard a clip of that nature. So.
Which was his plane? Or it's not in there?
Yes,
I know he wanted two planes, but the lead plane isn't shown, is it?
Oh, I don't know that that's the lead plane.
When that picture was taken, theoretically it was at 9:17 a.m. on the second day of November of 1945. That's when MacArthur got up from the table after signing, putting the last signature on the official surrender document. Supposedly somebody has reported that he said, "Where are the airplanes?" And he looked up and they just started. My duty in leading the 500 airplanes over this was to have the lead airplane, myself, arrive there at 9:17, and General Ramey, who was my boss, said, "That is one target time you better not miss." And that was because MacArthur was in charge of the ceremony, and MacArthur was a pretty hard-tailed guy, to put it politely, for ceremony. I told you in the beginning I wasn't going to give you a formal speech. I was just going to chat with you today.
Did you get
any other surprises? I didn't know that you were going to have this.
No, that's it. And then we have
This is a surprise to me.
Well, I got some more pictures. If you want some more pictures.
A lot of negotiations went on prior to the ceremony to get this to happen. There's very little written about this, and only a few of us left that know it. There was a lot of negotiation between MacArthur and Japan's surrender party. MacArthur was in Manila, and he said, anything we do and have to put on paper, you got to bring it to Manila. And they said, no, the ceremony is going to be in Tokyo. He said, I don't care where the hell it's going to be. We're going to negotiate it in Manila. So they painted a Japanese transport white, and they transported these bigwigs from Japan to Manila a couple of times. And during the they agreed to have the ceremony on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. And after MacArthur agreed to it, he thought of something. MacArthur was a traditionalist, a West Point graduate, a military historian, and he knew that in time past that when an army was defeated, and this is when armies used to meet man to man, when an army was defeated, they were disarmed, put at parade rest, and they would arm the winning army to the hilt and they would march them in front of them. And that was a show of force. And that was to show the defeated army they did the right thing. Part of it was to show some people, some soldiers who may have disagreed with what the generals had decided to do and could cause trouble. This was to convince them also that they had done the right thing. Am I talking into this thing? Is that it?
Good, good.
Can you hear me all right? I didn't realize I was talking to you direct. So MacArthur suddenly realized that he had agreed to something that was going to be difficult to show a show of force, and he said, what am I going to do for a show of force in the middle of Tokyo Bay? And my boss, General LeMay, said, I'll put every serviceable B-29 over the battleship when you sign the surrender ceremony. MacArthur said, that's great, that's it. And so that's how the last mission of World War II occurred. That was a combat mission because the 1,500 miles we traveled getting to Tokyo Bay, and before the last signature on the ceremony, on the surrender papers, during that 1,500 miles, we were still at war with Japan. So they called it, we got credit for a combat mission. We were actually fully armed with with all our 50 caliber machine guns. Were fully armed because there were rumors that some renegade organization of the Japanese army back in the hills would try to spoil the whole thing. And if you, I don't know whether you have it or not, but there are other pictures. You will see dozens of airplanes flying around here. There were 7 aircraft carriers in the harbor, in the Tokyo Bay at the time. They had all their fighters up surrounding the whole ceremony. And so there was a lot of precaution taken. One of the things that we were involved in is that when I say we, I'm talking about the Air Force, stipulated that all the Japanese airplanes on all the airfields in Japan had to be brought out and put on the ramp with the propellers off. And we sent scouts around to all these airports and flew by them and took pictures of them. And I have a good picture, I think probably with me, of about 100 planes on one field, all sitting out there without any propellers. But that didn't mean that there couldn't be a renegade outfit that an airplane was kept behind and they could still spoil the whole affair. Anyway, that's a little bit about.
Bob, where did you take off from?
Pardon?
Where did you take off from?
Where did we take off from? You got the next picture?
Yeah. Let's see.
Now this is an amateur.
That's about it.
Oh, yeah, he's an amateur.
There it is, right there. Right there.
This is a pictorial of mine.
He drew that.
This is Japan. That's Tokyo. This is Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. This is 1,500 miles from here to there. What? Where's the button? Ah, magic. That's Tokyo. There were, LeMay said he would put all available airplanes in commission in the air. At the time we had 5 wings, and those 5 wings came off of those 3 different islands. And somebody asked at one of the previous talks that I gave was how you ever got all this together and get them to do something at one time at one place. Well, that was really quite a trick. I was fortunate. My boss was General Ramey. My boss was General Ramey, and he was an old-timer in the Pacific War. He started out at the beginning, right after Pearl Harbor, in the Pacific, ended up in the South Pacific in the 12th Air Force, became a general there, and then he was, like myself, he was brought back to the United States to start the B-29 program, and they made him a wing commander. I've got it listed as #1 there for a certain reason. My boss was my top boss was General Ramey, and I was his private pilot. Whenever they had a staff meeting at headquarters in Guam, one of his aides would call up and say, "Vaucher, have a best B-29 ready tomorrow morning to take off at 9 o'clock for Guam, and you're the pilot." So I was very fortunate when we got down to these big-time staff meetings. I was considered part of the staff, which I wasn't, but I was mingled about, and I learned a lot of things that nobody ever knew went on. Now, that leads me up to Guam. They had a room about to the half of this room, and it was, the floor was slightly raised, and it was like blue water, and then at the far end over there was a raising for Japan, representing the shoreline there. They had supposedly the only mathematician that the Air Force had as a technical person, as the one who calculated when all these airplanes from different airports had to take off. It's 125 miles from there to Guam. So these airplanes were taken off at different places. And this mathematician laid out formulas for when every group, this is a wing, 1 wing, 2, 5 wings there.
Sorry about that.
Whenever every wing took off, and the lead airplane in each wing would radio in a position every so often, and they would, in this room, they would move airplanes along, and until they got all the way to the assembly point. Those are assembly points. That was airplanes arrived there over a period of 45 minutes. The lead airplane, which I was the lead of all. I had to be there a half hour before anybody, and I would circle about from here to Newark Airport, go around in a circle, and I would call sign the group that this is Victor Abel, Uncle Charlie, how easy Roger, calling all chickens to the hen house. And I would then transmit, when you radio guys know, on a frequency. Now what you don't realize is this is going to be the assembly point, and they're coming 1,500 miles to this point. Due to compass differences, navigators differences, airplanes arrived 20 miles this side and 20 miles that side, 40 miles apart. So when I was calling them in and sent a radio signal, this guy that came over here would pick up the signal and fly a radio beam into where I was circling. That is how you assembled all the airplanes. And when you got the full complement going, all in formation, and in this great big circle, which is from Bloomfield to Princeton, no, not quite that far, to New Brunswick. You're going around this big circle. They're at the same time, we're doing the same thing at these other 4 places. And to arrive at 9:17 over the thing there, we had to, everybody, this is a regular bombing mission was exactly like this. You always went to an IP, initial point. You couldn't have it any other way, because we learned this, we had them other way. If you had all these outfits coming in from different directions, you would have a mix-up of airplanes. So every group had to come to this IP and then go in on one single heading. And that was to keep confusion and airplanes running into one another, coming at them from different directions. What else did I need to tell about that?
What altitude?
Well, the lowest altitude we ever assembled anything like this was about 14,000, and the highest was about 24,000. We bombed at 32,000. We tried it for 2 missions, and we didn't hit anything. Came down. The reason we were at 32,000, we had learned that the Japanese Zero wasn't any good at that altitude, and their anti-aircraft wasn't any good above 15,000. So at 32,000, we were above enemy intrusion.
How many?
Pardon me.
So how many planes in each of these wings, and how long did it take to get to the IP?
I'm sorry you asked me that. I thought I should have figured out how far that was, and I said, well, nobody will ask me that.
We talked about this the other night. How long it took to go 1,500?
This distance to there was always between 60 and 100 miles.
No, from the islands.
Or it's
From
about
the
1,500.
takeoff.
1,500 miles.
1,500 miles.
1,500 miles, 7 hours. So you were 7 hours into flying and 7 hours back. They were approximately 14-hour missions.
So to get over Tokyo Bay at 9:17, you had
9:17.
everybody had to take off
At 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning,
1
right?
in the
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
How many planes in each of these things?
100.
well, that's the big controversy. I was told by headquarters at Guam right after the mission that I had 500 airplanes in it. I've heard that is way too many. And LeMay's, everybody know who General LeMay was?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bombs
In
went
LeMay's book, he said there were 432 airplanes in it. And I started out by using 525 because that's what headquarters told me we had in it. If you figure it out, it comes out, 5 groups comes out about 500 airplanes. There were 5,000, about 5,200 people in the air at one time here. Air crews were 11 man to a B-29, and you had 45 squadrons times that comes out 5,200 people. Behind them was another 17,000 people on the ground. That includes everybody from cooks to clerks to whatever. So it took a lot of people to support this thing, bomb handling and bomb inventory keepers and all that. It was a big tremendous operation.
What was the separation?
Again, pardon me.
Yeah, what was the separation between planes?
From wing to wing, what was the distance between them? Between the 5 wings, how far apart were they?
How far apart were they?
Yeah, separation.
Oh, you mean between these paths?
Yes.
No, the planes.
They were in formation.
No, they weren't in formation. That's the other thing. General Aker started out with the B-29 program, and he ran 2 missions, and then he got fired. One of the things he did wrong was he assembled the airplanes at the home base, and they flew formation all the way to Tokyo. Well, by the time they got to Tokyo, they were dead. Flying formation is very intense, and as a result, when they got to the target, well, they had 2 things. This is when we discovered the what's the stream of air up here?
Jet stream.
Huh?
The jet stream.
Jet stream. We discovered the jet stream in the bombing of Japan, and we had never. All the weather from Japan comes down over Siberia, Manchuria, comes down sort of like the angle that comes to us from Canada and so forth. What was I going to say about
The jet stream.
Jet stream.
Flying
Oh,
against the stream.
when Aker started out with the first missions, they didn't even hit the city of Tokyo. They were so far off. Part of it was because they ran into the jet stream up there, which they didn't even know exists. We didn't even. It wasn't even in our vocabulary at that time. And if you were flying with the tailwind and the jet stream, it was faster than the bombardier could manipulate his bomb, his tools. If you had a wind coming toward you, I'm talking about 175 mile an hour wind now, 175 mile an hour jet stream. If it was coming to you at an angle, you would have to put so much crab into going over the target that the bomb sight couldn't compensate for that. It wouldn't handle that much differential. The airplane had to be pretty much lined up with where it was going. And if the jet stream was on your headwind, you were so slow that the anti-aircraft, you were sitting duck for them, because an airplane that flew 190 miles an hour with 175 mile an hour headwind is a wonderful target. Any other questions about that? That's a rough picture.
I have a question. When they finally returned, how did they have like 10% left in their tanks, or they have plenty of fuel to account for any problems coming back to Guam?
So for a round trip on a bombing mission, how were you on fuel by the time you got back?
How are you feeling?
Your fuel.
How much reserves?
Fuel.
You could fly about 18 hours.
Oh, and how many hours did it take?
You know what a vapor is? We had vapors. Typically that trip took 8,000 gallons of gas. And when you got back, if you had 500 gallons left, you were in pretty good shape. But you got to spread 500 gallons through about 100 feet of tanks. The B-29 fully tanked up was 8,500 gallons, but it was in tanks in the wings. So you spread 500 gallons out there, and you didn't want to do any deep turns or dives, because your water would go, the gas would go off at the entrance, and you'd get a sputtery engine.
Yeah.
And
Gotta be careful.
I can tell you quite a few stories about that. Pardon me. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bob, you flew up there at 14,000 feet, and then somebody said the ceiling was like 15.
I want to keep that.
The ceiling was around 1,000 or 1,500 in the bay. So when did you learn that you had to come down quite a bit so everybody could see you?
Can you
To fly over the target because the ceiling was low?
No, the ceremony.
You can see
the ceremony.
in the picture.
Over the Missouri, the ceiling was low. So when did you drop down to below ceiling, going over the Missouri?
Oh. Well, on this, if this was the flyover for the Missouri, we didn't go up the high altitude. We flew out at probably 5,000 feet all the way, and we only had to drop down to 2,000 feet. I went over that one picture that's taken up from the Missouri is my airplane, which reminds me of another story. Last year, we went to Hawaii and went on the battleship Missouri. Anybody been on the battleship Missouri?
No.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a big circle up on one of the decks, and it says and that MacArthur sat here when he signed the peace treaty. And I stood in that circle and I looked up, and you know, I could see my airplane going across, and I got goosebumps all over me, and I got emotional, and I had to turn my head for my friend here. It was, I was thinking about 45 years ago, I was up there looking down at this point, and I've got a good picture. I had a Chicago Tribune photographer on board my aircraft, and he took a picture at 9:17, and it's a beautiful picture of the battleship Missouri. And so I have a forever picture, which hangs incidentally in the Nimitz Museum. And we were at about 2,000 feet altitude, and that's about all I can.
Bob?
How did you end up in the lead, Bob? How did you end up with the lead, being the lead plane?
Well, I told you General Ramey was an old hand, an old war hand, and I was also, I flew my first combat mission 10 days after Pearl Harbor, and went on to fly 117 total. And General Ramey, for whatever reason, made me his personal pilot. And generals don't fly airplanes. They just ride an airplane. And they had the warlords that designed this whole flyover, the whole ceremony, had decided that General Ramey should be the lead airplane. So, because he was one of the old war hands that was out there still running, he ran the 58th Bomb Wing. And so I was privy to all the details. Naturally, I was air commander, so I had to know what the whole story was. 2 days before, you gotta listen to this, 2 days before the ceremony, somebody said, for gosh sake, Ramey ought to be on board the battleship Missouri for the ceremony. He's an old hand, we gotta get him here. So they sent a B-29 with General Ramey to Tokyo so he could be in the ceremony on board the ship. General Ramey said, well, you know all the details, you're the air commander. That's how I got to be air commander. You gotta be at the right place at the right time, and things can happen.
Did you lose any planes on the trip? Did you lose any planes on the trip?
Did you lose any planes on the trip?
Who was in the plane?
Did you lose any aircraft while on the trip?
Any mishaps, crashes, collisions?
Huh?
The planes.
What about it?
Did they all get back?
Crash into each other like in training missions sometimes?
Did everybody get there and back safely?
Did anybody what?
Get there and back safely for the flyover?
Oh, no, we didn't. We didn't lose a plane on that combat mission.
That's good.
That was one hell
We
of
had a fair amount of planes aboard, so that's another reason why the figure 525 is just sort of a figure. How many aborted because of engine trouble or because you don't realize that these crews have been, most of them have been flying bombing missions for the last 6 months or some of them like myself for the last 5 years. They weren't very willing to risk themselves after having gotten that far. So if they had a slight trouble with the airplane, an engine was coughing or something, on a mission they might go ahead and make it because in order to get credit for a mission, you had to get credit. So that's that, but yeah.
After the flyover, did you stay in the 500 whatever formation all together in one line, or did the groups break up and go back individually?
Good question. After the flyover, the formation broke up, and about 50% of the 500 airplanes went on sightseeing trips. And that's a fact. I've got good pictures taken at 2,000 feet over Tokyo and seeing the results of some of our bombing, which was eye-opening. I had, incidentally, on eye-openers, as I told you, I got to go down to headquarters with General Ramey, and I sort of was considered part of his staff. I didn't realize how much we had reconnaissance airplanes over Japan every day, taking pictures, and taking weather samplings. That's how the weather, our whole weather map was made up from weather reports from these various airplanes reports. What was my train of thought on that?
When you came back, you landed and met with Ramey at some point, and everybody said congratulations, well done.
The tourist, you were a tourist.
It wasn't hard at all. All you had to say is everybody's on your own, and what you knew is you had to get back to your base. So depending upon how much gas you'd use, you would sightsee around. And
what happened when you got back to base that day? What happened when you got back to base that day?
They opened a bottle of whiskey.
That's about the truth.
I know.
That was the last mission of World War II. Really, it was considered a bombing mission, or a combat mission, I should say. There was something else
Well, can I ask you a question about, you picked up the first B-25 from the Boeing company, right?
B-29.
You picked up the B-29.
29.
Yeah, you picked up the first B-29, and you also developed some kind of a change to the plane to increase its glide capabilities. In other words, its range. Could you talk about that feature?
How I picked up the first airplane, commercial, the first airplane the Air Force accepted as a completed unit, ready to go.
Right.
Ready to go to combat.
Right.
Which was a farce, but that's the way it was.
Okay. But you had something to do with helping to increase the range of the B-29.
Yeah.
Could you explain that?
Okay, but let me finish the first question.
Sure.
So I had piled up a lot of hours in 4-engine aircraft, and I was the first, and subsequent to that in the B-29, I was the first person to get 1,000 hours in a B-29. And it was made very public because we'd had a lot of failures of the B-29, and they used it as a publicity thing to make people feel a little more comfortable with the airplane. And they made a lot of fuss over the fact that I was the first person to get 1,000 hours. And 1,000 hours is a lot of hours in a combat airplane. The other question you had was...
Cruise control.
Oh, you had was what?
Your cruise control to increase your bombing.
Oh, God, that's a long story.
That's another talk. You want to save that for next time?
Yeah, you come back again.
You can come back again, sure. Okay.
One of the most exotic missions that I went on in World War II, the Japanese controlled all the South Pacific, and the Dutch owned Sumatra and Indonesia, and they kicked the Dutch out of there, and the Dutch had a big refinery in Palembang, Sumatra, and it made high-test gasoline, which was airplane gasoline, and it supplied the Japanese airplanes in the South Pacific. Our targets were all picked in Washington at the Pentagon. General LeMay didn't pick our targets. The targets were picked in Washington, but he was given a bevy of targets, and he could pick the target he wanted to hit today, depending upon the weather reports and intelligence that they got back. I started to tell you a while ago, and I skipped it, was when I was down in headquarters, I found that intelligence had all kinds of information that those of us down in the combat level hadn't the slightest idea what was going on. From the reconnaissance, they got it from the reconnaissance airplane, and they had, and I saw this, they could look through a magnifying device at photographs, and they could see a man standing. They could see machine tools, what kind of machine tools that were in this burned out factory. It was amazing the information that they were able to accumulate. But you had another better question that I've skipped now. What was it?
It was the glide control.
The gas deal.
Yes.
Well, they decided to try to limit the production of the refinery, oil refinery in Palembang. The ships went up a big river up to the refinery, loaded up and went out to various places in the South Pacific. They decided if they mined that channel, they would cut off the supply of aviation gas to the Japanese in the South Pacific. So 8 of us, 8 B-29, there were 12 B-29, but 4 of them aborted. 8 of us were loaded up with mines, which we had never had anything to do with, to drop in the river. They flew in a Dutch captain. Now, remember, this was all Dutch country at one time, Dutch-controlled country at one time. They flew in from England a ship captain who had flown, who had gone up and down that river many times. And I can remember to this day, he said, now, this crook, we had maps of the thing, and he'd say, right here it'd be a good place for a mine, and right over there it'd be a good place for a mine, and he picked all the places for us to drop a mine. Now, we had to drop these mines at 500 feet of altitude, 500 feet. To get to this, we had to fly over the spine of Sumatra, 12,000 foot mountain. We flew over the 12,000 foot mountains and let down to this side all the way to sea level for all practical purposes and come up this river. And the captain said, now, if they haven't changed the code system, this point will be point B, and that would be point D, and that would be point P. And he gave it, and the what's the
Morse code.
Morse code.
The Morse code. All these lights flash the Morse code. Light A, light B, light C was 1, 2, 3, 4. He said if they haven't changed anything, that light will be B, and that light will be F, and that light will be so forth. And we let down through solid clouds. There was a bank of clouds on this side, and we broke out at about 1,000 feet over the sea of Indonesia. It's got a name, and came back up the river, and here were these lights, A, B, C, just exactly like he said. This is 4 years after the war started. They kept it. It was a navigation system, and the Japanese had kept it going. So we dropped mines at these places. We shut down that source. They couldn't bring anything out by ship after that. But that's a side issue. You asked me about gasoline. So we had not anticipated all this weather on this side. There was none on that side. And so we had to do some extra flying to get across. At the lowest place, we went through a spine of the ridge. We went through a lower place. But we used up gas that we didn't have to use. We had flown out of Ceylon, India. Ceylon is way down in the tip of India. About halfway back over the Indian Ocean, where they just lost that airliner recently somewhere in it. I've been right over that thing from one side to the other. About halfway across it, I could say probably when everybody but the pilot and the co-pilot were asleep, the big bang occurred. The airplane shook like heck, and the flight engineer woke up and saw that there was a fire in the number 3 engine, and there'd been an explosion in the engine. And there's a whole reason for that, but that's another story. The procedure in the book was you had 4 fire extinguishers. And the procedure is that you had a fire in an engine, you pulled 2 of them and waited to see what happened. If it wasn't out, then you pull the other 2 and hope that it went out. My flight engineer, with this shaking of the whole airplane and the big bang, and he looked up at his instruments and he pulled all 4. And it put out the fire.
Got lucky.
And we managed to get back to Ceylon. When I came in for a landing, when I tipped over, I had engines going putt putt, this one and this one to pick up and this one to pick up. I practically glided into it for my final approach. That's how low you can get on gas. That's about as low as you can get and get back.
So how many mines did your group drop?
That was the longest mission of World War II, 4,030 miles.
But I mean, how many mines could your plane hold, and how many did you drop in that?
I hope you all can appreciate that my hearing is very impaired.
Can somebody repeat it?
I'm getting new hearing aids, and they made new molds to go in my ear, and they injured my inner ear, and it bled considerably. And I'm wearing a makeshift until my ear gets better. And so I'm.
The question was, how many mines, Bob?
How did you drop the mines? Could you put them on a bomb rack and release them like a bomb?
How did we drop the bomb?
The mines. The mines were on the rack. The mines. Could you put them on a bomb rack and release them like a bomb?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, you could?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I never
Oh,
did that.
we dropped we dropped 12,000 mines around Japan, all their harbors. When the war ended, they were completely disabled. They couldn't get ships in and out of harbor because we had 12,000 mines in all the harbors. We had one of these wings out of Guam. All they did was mining. They dropped mines from day one. They didn't really go on bombing missions. But I needed to drink that Sprite. Oh, okay.
I'd like to share one last thought here, because I feel we're coming to the end. My father, Ernest Fox, was right here on September 2nd, 1945. He was in the 2nd Engineer Special Brigade, and he drove landing craft, and he was involved in the invasion of Japan. So he took the first troops into Yokohama Harbor. But he was standing there that day, and when I was a young man, my father told me about how the airplanes came across, and the airplanes, they not only did bombers, but they also had fighters and other aircraft that were local to this. And my father, as he described it, the airplanes went up across Japan with such a show of force that the Japanese, they were worried that they were going to attack, that they were going to continue fighting. And he said, when you could see all of these airplanes from horizon to horizon for a long time, they were flying over, and he was there. He saw your airplane come over. And so we've never had an opportunity to just talk about this, but my father saw you fly over and told me about it long before I ever got to meet you. So
did you ever tell me that story?
I did when we were at the conference that one time.
Okay.
I mentioned it to you. I mentioned it to you.
I was going to say somebody told me the same story.
Exactly. But these folks weren't there. So you know, there's a second opinion. We have a picture, we have the actual person, and then my father told me as a young man this story of you flying over. So thank you very much, sir.
Oh, you think that's about enough remarks?
I think so.
Great job. Great job.
All right. I'll finish my remarks at the next time you call.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. And on behalf of stand up, stay standing for a second. So we initiated at the Shooting Star chapter level. It's just a little recognition, and at the state level, the Jimmy Doolittle coin award. This is a Jimmy Doolittle challenge coin. And honestly, I may have given you one of these before, but I'm giving you one again. Because you contribute so often, and we appreciate this.
Well,